The howling was the sound of a kingdom dying. Saren heard it long before she saw the gates, carried on the December wind that bit through her threadbare cloak and turned her breath to frost. It was not the howl of wolves hunting or calling to their pack. This was deeper, more human in its grief, resonating in her chest cavity until her own heart seemed to echo the sound. Snow fell steadily, dusting her silver-white hair and the bundle she clutched against her chest. Her fingers were numb, frostbitten from 5 brutal days in the wilderness, but she did not dare loosen her grip. The Iron Gate Kingdom loomed ahead through the storm, massive timber walls rising from stone foundations, torches flickering behind ice-covered battlements. Shadows moved along the ramparts, guards pacing in the twilight. Saren's legs trembled with exhaustion as she climbed the final slope toward the entrance. The howling grew louder, more anguished, and she understood with perfect clarity that she was approaching a place drowning in sorrow. Inside the bundle she carried, 2 tiny bodies stirred weakly. She adjusted the torn silk wrapped around them, royal blue fabric embroidered with a crest she had come to recognize over the past 5 days. The Blackwood crest. A wolf's head encircled by a crown of iron thorns. 5 days ago, she had been scavenging for winter herbs in the Thornwood territory, miles north of any settlement. The blizzard had come suddenly, whiteout conditions that should have sent her running for shelter. But instead, she had heard something impossible. Infant cries, faint and desperate, cutting through the wind. Every instinct screamed at her to ignore it, to save herself. But her feet had moved on their own, following a pull she could not name, stumbling through drifts until she found them. 2 wolf pups, newly born, abandoned in the snow beside a frozen creek. They were wrapped in blood-stained silk, so small they fit in her cupped hands. One was slightly larger, his fur already showing hints of dark silver. The other was smaller, weaker, his coat a pale ash color that seemed to glow against the white snow. Both were dying. Saren had no experience with wolf pups. She had been cast out from her birth pack 3 years ago, declared a broken omega, powerless and worthless. But in that moment, crouched in the snow with 2 dying infants, something inside her had awakened. She pressed them against her chest, opened her cloak to share her body heat, and ran. For 5 days, she kept them alive. She fed them with an eyedropper, melted snow for hydration, wrapped them in layers against the cold. At night, she held them skin to skin, her grandmother's blood pendant pressed between them, willing warmth into their tiny bodies. She did not understand how she knew what to do. She simply knew. On the 3rd day, she had examined the silk more carefully and seen the Blackwood crest. Recognition had struck her like a physical blow. The missing heirs. The entire region had heard the rumors. Alpha King Thorn Blackwood's twin sons, stolen during an ambush that killed their mother. Presumed dead. The kingdom in mourning. She should have left them at the nearest outpost and disappeared back into exile. Instead, something pulled her south, toward the Iron Gate Kingdom, toward a place she had never been and a king who would have every reason to suspect her. Now, standing before the massive wooden gates, Saren felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The heavy iron knocker was shaped like a wolf's head, jaws open in a silent howl. She reached for it with trembling hands, her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory. Trust what you feel, not what you see. When the time comes, you will know. The knocker fell against wood with a sound that echoed across the valley. The howling inside the walls stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the grief had been. Saren waited, snow accumulating on her shoulders, her heart hammering against her ribs. Minutes crawled past. She began to wonder if she should knock again or simply leave the bundle at the gates and run. Then she heard footsteps approaching from the other side, heavy boots crunching through snow. The massive door creaked open just enough to reveal a man's face. Hard angular features, a scar cutting through one eyebrow, pale green eyes that swept over her with immediate suspicion. His gaze moved from her face to the bundle in her arms, and his nostrils flared slightly. His entire expression transformed in an instant, shock replacing hostility. "What are you carrying?" His voice was rough, urgent. Saren pulled back the silk carefully, revealing the 2 tiny wolf pups nestled against her chest. They were breathing, barely, their small bodies rising and falling in shallow rhythm. "I think they belong to you." They were alone in the wilderness. "I kept them alive." The guard stared at the pups, his face draining of color. Then, without warning, he grabbed her arm with crushing strength and dragged her through the doorway. "Get inside. Now." The gates slammed shut behind them with a sound like thunder. Saren stumbled into a large courtyard surrounded by timber buildings arranged in a semicircle. People emerged from doorways, drawn by the commotion, their movements unnaturally fluid and predatory. They formed a loose circle around her, eyes gleaming in the torchlight, expressions ranging from hostile to disbelieving. She clutched the pups tighter, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. The guard who had pulled her inside raised his voice, a command that silenced the rising murmurs. "Get the king. Tell him she has the princes." A woman with auburn hair tied back in a severe braid disappeared into the largest building, moving with inhuman speed. The others pressed closer, studying Saren with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She could feel their suspicion, their anger, their desperate hope. One woman reached toward the bundle, but the guard, Captain Vex, blocked her. "No one touches them until the king sees." "How did you find them?" Another man demanded, stepping forward with barely contained aggression. "Why did you bring them here? Are you working with the ones who took them?" Before Saren could answer, the crowd parted. The murmurs died completely, and Alpha King Thorn Blackwood emerged from the Great Hall. Saren understood instantly why they called him king. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, an almost physical pressure that made the air thicken. He was taller than any man she had ever seen, broad-shouldered and battle-scarred, wearing black mourning clothes that seemed to absorb the torchlight. His dark hair was shot through with silver streaks, falling past his jawline, framing a face carved from grief and fury. But it was his eyes that held her. Amber, like the stone in her grandmother's pendant, burning with an intensity that seemed barely human. When his gaze fell on the bundle in her arms, he froze mid-step. Every muscle in his body went rigid. The crowd held its collective breath. Impossible. The word was barely audible, a broken sound from a man who had forgotten how to hope. Thorn crossed the courtyard in long strides, closing the distance between them. Saren should have been terrified. Everything about him screamed danger, barely leashed violence, a predator in human skin. But as he approached, she felt something else entirely. Recognition. Not of his face, but of something deeper, as though her body knew something her mind did not. "They are alive." Her voice was steadier than she expected. "Barely. They need their family." He stopped before her, close enough that she could feel the unnatural heat radiating from his body despite the freezing air. His gaze moved from the pups to her face, studying her with such intensity she felt transparent. One of the pups, the larger one, stirred in the bundle and let out a tiny, high-pitched whimper. The sound broke something in Thorn. Without warning, he dropped to his knees in the snow before her, a king reduced to a shattered father. His hands reached for the bundle, trembling as though afraid the vision would vanish if he moved too quickly. Saren carefully lowered the silk-wrapped bundle, transferring the precious weight into his waiting arms. As their hands brushed, skin touching skin, the world exploded. A jolt of electricity shot through her arm and up her spine. Her vision widened out, then filled with images that were not her own. Moonlight on snow. The sensation of running faster than humanly possible. Trees blurring past. A woman's face, beautiful and fierce, amber eyes identical to Thorn's. The same woman lying in blood, eyes vacant, life gone. Two tiny pups crying in the darkness. Days of fruitless searching, every trail going cold. Crushing grief and guilt that threatened to consume everything. And then, suddenly, she was seeing through Thorn's eyes. Seeing herself. A rejection ceremony in a moonlit clearing, pack members turning their backs as she was cast out. Her grandmother dying, pressing a silver pendant into her palm, whispering words about destiny. 3 years of solitary survival in a cabin at the edge of nowhere. Finding the pups in a blizzard, following a compulsion she could not explain. The overwhelming need to bring them home. Both gasped back to consciousness simultaneously, collapsing. Saren caught herself on one hand, the other still touching Thorn's arm. He stared at her with wide eyes, pupils dilated until the amber was just a thin ring around bottomless black. "Trueborn." He whispered the word like a prayer and a curse combined. The whisper rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. "Trueborn Omega." The words were repeated in voices that mixed reverence with fear, hope with suspicion. Saren heard them but could not process their meaning. Her head spun from whatever had just happened, from the intimacy of sharing memories with a stranger, from the weight of his grief pressing against her consciousness. "What does that mean?" She managed to ask, her voice shaking. Thorn rose slowly to his feet, cradling his sons against his chest. His expression had transformed into something unreadable, Wonder and wariness and something deeper she could not name. You are not powerless. You never were. I do not understand. Your presence is already affecting them. He looked down at the pups and Saren followed his gaze. It was true. Their breathing had deepened, their small bodies relaxing against Thorn's chest in a way they had not done since she found them. They were responding to both of them, to whatever had just passed between her and their father. Before either could speak again, one of the pups began to struggle. The smaller one, the ash-colored infant, suddenly convulsed. His breathing turned ragged, shallow, his tiny body seizing. Thorn's face drained of color. Mira. No. Saren did not think. She reached for the struggling pup, her hand pressing against his tiny chest. The pendant at her throat, her grandmother's final gift, blazed hot against her skin. Golden light flared from beneath her palm, visible even in the torchlight, flowing from the pendant through her fingers into the dying pup. The courtyard went silent. Every eye fixed on the impossible sight. The pup took a deeper breath, then another. His heartbeat, which had been fluttering weakly, stabilized into a steady rhythm. The golden light faded, leaving Saren swaying on her feet. Thorn moved with inhuman speed, his free arm wrapping around her waist to steady her. His touch sent another spark through her, less violent than before but no less electric. She looked up into his face and saw his expression had shifted again, suspicion melting into something she could not name. Captain Vex's voice cut through the moment. My king, we should get them inside. The storm is worsening. But also, his tone changed, becoming more careful. Sir, the timing. An outsider appears the same night our scouts reported movement on the northern border. Thorn's jaw tightened. His arm remained around Saren's waist, supporting her weight, but his eyes had gone cold and calculating again. Bring her to the royal chambers. Postguards. No one enters without my command. He turned those burning amber eyes back to her. You saved them. But now you need to tell me everything. Starting with how you really found my sons. Saren met his gaze, exhausted and confused, but refusing to back down. I found them dying in the snow. That is the truth. Thorn studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. We will see. As they moved toward the great hall, Saren clutched her pendant, feeling it warm beneath her fingers. Around them, pack members watched with expressions she could not read. Some grateful, others suspicious, and beyond the walls, in the darkness of the forest, something was watching. A figure stood in the tree line, obscured by falling snow, observing through a spyglass. The man's face was hidden in shadow, but his voice carried satisfaction. So the trueborn lives. Perfect. Let them bond. It will make taking her so much sweeter. He lowered the spyglass and disappeared into the darkness, leaving no trace but footprints that the falling snow would soon erase. Saren woke to unfamiliar luxury. Soft sheets against her skin, warmth from a crackling fireplace, the faint scent of pine and something medicinal. For a disoriented moment, she could not remember where she was. Then memory flooded back. The gates, the courtyard, Thorn collapsing to his knees, the blinding vision when their hands touched, the dying pup gasping back to life beneath her palm. She sat up carefully, her body aching with exhaustion deeper than anything physical. The room around her was nothing like she had expected. She had imagined something primitive, rough-hewn wood and animal pelts, but instead found herself in a chamber that spoke of wealth and refinement. Timber beams soared overhead, carved with intricate patterns. The bed she occupied was large enough for 3 people, draped in furs and fine linens. Tapestries covered the stone walls, depicting wolves running beneath a full moon. The fireplace was massive, built from river stone, flames dancing behind an ornate iron screen. She had been cleaned. Her hair, no longer matted with snow and dirt, hung in damp waves over her shoulders. Someone had dressed her in clothes that were not her own. A royal blue tunic of soft wool, fitted leather leggings, fur-lined boots that looked expensive. Her torn exile clothes were nowhere to be seen. The only thing that remained from before was her grandmother's pendant, still warm against her skin. Across the room, near the fireplace, a specially crafted nest held 2 small forms. The pups. Both were sleeping peacefully, their tiny bodies rising and falling in synchronized rhythm. She felt an overwhelming urge to go to them, to check that they were truly breathing, truly alive. You slept for 3 hours. The voice came from the shadows near the window. Saren turned, her heart jumping, to find Thorn standing in the darkness. He was watching the snow fall beyond the glass, his back to her, still wearing the black mourning clothes from earlier. The set of his shoulders carried a tension that spoke of sleeplessness and worry. He turned when he sensed her attention, and in the firelight, his face looked haunted. Dark circles shadowed his amber eyes. A muscle worked in his jaw. He studied her with the same intensity as before, as though trying to read something written beneath her skin. Mira said you gave too much energy to Ash. His voice was rough, as though he had spent the hours shouting commands. You could have died. Saren's gaze moved to the nest. Ash. The smaller pup, the one who had stopped breathing. Is he? Both are stable. Thorn crossed the room, his movements fluid despite his size. Thanks to you. The words carried gratitude, but also confusion, suspicion, and something deeper she could not name. Saren pushed back the covers and stood, her legs unsteady. She moved to the nest, needing to see them with her own eyes. Both pups stirred slightly at her approach, small noses twitching. The larger one, dark silver fur gleaming in the firelight, let out a soft whimper. The smaller one, Ash, with his pale ash-colored coat, pressed closer to his brother. They were beautiful. Perfect. Alive. Tell me everything. Thorn's voice came from directly behind her, close enough that she could feel the unnatural heat radiating from his body. Where exactly did you find them? How did you know to bring them here? Saren did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the pups, finding it easier to speak the truth while not meeting that burning amber gaze. I found them near a frozen creek in the Thornwood territory. 5 days ago. I was gathering winter herbs when the blizzard hit. I should have sought shelter, but I heard crying. Infant crying, impossible in that wilderness. I followed the sound. She paused, remembering the moment she had found them. I did not recognize the crest at first. I only knew they were dying. I kept them alive with body heat, with instinct, with everything my grandmother taught me about healing. It was not until the 3rd day that I examined the silk closely enough to see the blackwood crest. That is when I knew they were the missing heirs. And you brought them here. Why? Thorn's voice was closer now, almost at her ear. You could have left them at any outpost. Collected a reward. Disappeared back into whatever life you had before. Something pulled me here. Saren finally turned to face him, tilting her head back to meet his eyes. I cannot explain it better than that. Every instinct said to run, to save myself, to avoid this place. But something stronger said to bring them home. To you. Thorn studied her face in the firelight, searching for lies. His gaze dropped to the pendant at her throat. That belonged to your grandmother. She gave it to me when she died. 3 years ago. Her last words were about bridges between worlds. I thought it was fever talking. Old woman's rambling. Saren touched the pendant, feeling its familiar warmth. She said our family had always been bridges. I never understood what she meant. Something shifted in Thorn's expression. Your grandmother. Elara Winters. She was midwife to my birth. She knew what we were. Saren stared at him, the revelation hitting her like a physical blow. You knew her? She was trusted. One of the few humans who understood our kind. Thorn moved past her to the window, looking out at the falling snow. The Winters bloodline has always been different. Sensitives. Boundary walkers. Those who can perceive the supernatural world without being fully part of it. Your grandmother had the gift. It seems you have inherited more than just her pendant. Saren's mind raced, trying to reconcile this new information with everything she thought she knew. If my grandmother knew, if our family had this gift, why was I cast out? Why did my pack reject me? Because they sensed what you were and feared it. Thorn turned back to face her, his expression hard. A trueborn Omega is the rarest of all gifts. Packs fight wars to claim one. Your birth pack likely did not understand what you were, only that you carried power they could not control. So they called you broken and cast you out before you could awaken fully. The word struck at the foundation of everything Saren believed about herself. 3 years of thinking she was worthless, powerless, rejected because she was defective. And now this stranger was telling her it had all been a lie. That she had been cast out not because she was too weak, but because she was too strong. Before she could process this, the door opened. A woman entered, carrying a leather satchel. She was older, perhaps 50, with auburn hair streaked heavily with silver, pulled back in a practical braid. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing as they swept over Saren. So you're finally awake. The woman set her satchel on a nearby table and began pulling out various items. Glass vials, dried herbs, a strange copper instrument. I am Mira, royal healer. Sit. Let me examine you. Saren hesitated, but Thorn gave a slight nod. Mira does not ask twice. She sat on the edge of the bed while Mira approached. The healer took her wrist, pressing 2 fingers to her pulse point, counting silently. Then she pulled back Saren's eyelids, examining her pupils in the firelight. Lifted the pendant, studying it with professional interest. She is awakening. Mira released the pendant and stepped back, her expression thoughtful. The bond with the princes accelerated it. Under normal circumstances, a trueborn Omega discovers her abilities gradually over years. You discovered yours in a moment of desperation. What does that mean? Saren asked, looking between Mira and Thorn. Trueborn Omega. Everyone keeps saying it like I should understand. Mira pulled a chair close and sat, her gaze level and direct. In the hierarchy of our kind, there are alphas who lead, betas who enforce, and omegas who balance. But among omegas, there are degrees of power. Most are empaths, able to sense and soothe emotions within their pack. But a trueborn omega is something more. You can sense betrayal and lies. You can feel emotional wounds as if they were physical. And most dangerous of all, you can project emotions. Healing calm or weaponized fear. Whatever you will it to be. Saren felt her throat tighten. That is what I did. To Ash. I gave him energy. You gave him life force. Your own. Mira's expression turned severe. You nearly killed yourself doing it. A trueborn untrained is dangerous to herself and everyone around her. You cannot give more than you have. The next time might drain you completely. The warning settled like ice in Saren's stomach. And if I do not help? If one of them needs me and I refuse? Then they die. Mira did not soften the truth. The pups have already imprinted on you. That bond is permanent. They recognize you as pack. As mother. Breaking that bond would kill them far more surely than any wound. Saren looked at the sleeping pups, feeling the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. I did not ask for this. No one asks for what they are. Mira stood, gathering her supplies. But you are what you are. The question is what you will do with it. She glanced at Thorn, something unspoken passing between them, then moved toward the door. Train her. Mira said over her shoulder. Before she burns herself out trying to save everyone. The door closed behind her, leaving Saren alone with Thorn once more. The silence stretched between them, filled with questions neither seemed ready to ask. Thorn moved to the chair Mira had vacated, sitting with the heaviness of a man carrying unbearable weight. His elbows rested on his knees, hands clasped, amber eyes fixed on her face. What does imprinting mean? Saren asked quietly. Truly? It means they recognize you as pack. As family. As someone whose presence is essential to their survival. Thorn's voice was low, almost gentle. Wolf pups imprint on their parents, their pack, in the first days of life. It is instinct, older than thought. You kept them alive when they should have died. You fed them, warmed them, gave them your energy. They bonded to you as surely as if you had given birth to them. And if I leave? His jaw tightened. They would fade. Stop eating. Stop responding. Eventually stop breathing. It would take days, perhaps a week. But they would die. Saren closed her eyes, feeling the trap closing around her. I came here to return them. To give them back to their family. Not to become their mother. Too late. Thorn's words were blunt. The bond exists. You can accept it or deny it, but you cannot break it. Not without killing them. Before Saren could respond, bells began ringing. Not the gentle bells of evening prayer, but harsh alarm bells that sent her heart racing. Shouts erupted from somewhere in the compound. Running footsteps thundered past the door. Thorn was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. His entire demeanor changed, becoming harder, colder, more dangerous. Saren saw his eyes begin to glow, the amber brightening until they seemed to burn with inner fire. The door burst open. Captain Vex stood in the doorway, sword drawn, breathing hard. My king. Northern border breach. Hunters with silver weapons. Thorn's face became a mask of controlled fury. Full defensive positions. Protect the royal wing at all costs. He turned to Saren, and his voice became a command. Stay here. Guard the pups. He started toward the door. Wait. Saren stood, her mind racing. This cannot be coincidence. The same night I arrive? Thorn paused, his hand on the doorframe. The same suspicion flickered in his eyes, the doubt that had been there from the beginning. Vex, tell me. Sir, one of the scouts captured a hunter before he died. Vex's expression was grim. The hunter was laughing. Said they were here for the trueborn and the royal bloodline. Said someone had promised them both. Saren's blood ran cold. They knew. They knew I was coming here. Thorn's expression turned to stone. This was a trap. He looked at her, and she saw the realization forming. They let you find the pups. Knew you would bring them home. Knew we would let you inside the walls. Not they, cousin. I did. The new voice came from the doorway, smooth and cold. A man stepped into the room, moving past Vex with casual confidence. He was tall, nearly as tall as Thorn, with similar features but leaner, more refined. Dark hair, pale eyes, wearing clothes that spoke of wealth and status. Behind him came two guards, pack members by their scent, but something was wrong about them. Their eyes were dull, their movements mechanical. Thorn's reaction was instant. His body shifted partially, not fully transforming but no longer entirely human. His eyes blazed brighter, claws extended from his fingertips, canines lengthening into fangs. Kale. The man, Kale, smiled. It was a predator's smile, empty of warmth. Hello, cousin. I see you have been reunited with your precious heirs. How touching. Saren felt the air in the room change, becoming charged with violence barely restrained. She stepped backward instinctively, positioning herself closer to the nest where the pups were beginning to stir, sensing danger. You orchestrated this. Thorn's voice was barely human, a growl underlying every word. The ambush. The kidnapping. All of it was you. Kale spread his hands in mock innocence. I prefer to think of it as necessary political maneuvering. Your sister was in the way. The pups were symbols of your legitimacy. I needed them gone. Unfortunately, my mercenaries were incompetent. The storm scattered them, the pups were lost before I could finish the job properly. You killed Lena. Thorn took a step forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Your own blood. Necessary sacrifice for the future I deserve. Kale's smile never wavered. But then I heard the most interesting rumor. A trueborn Omega, living in exile up north. Rejected by her pack. Alone. Vulnerable. And I thought, what if I could solve both problems at once? Saren's mind raced, pieces falling into place. You sent the compulsions. You guided me to find them. Dark magic, very subtle. Kale inclined his head in acknowledgement. Just enough to tug you in the right direction. I knew what you were, even if you did not. I knew you would save them. Knew you would bring them home. And I knew my cousin would let you inside these walls, distracted by grief and hope. His smile widened. And while he was distracted, I arranged for hunters to breach the compound. Silver weapons. UV lights. Everything necessary to end this farce of a kingdom. Outside, the sounds of battle intensified. Howls of pain, the clash of weapons, human screams. Thorn's entire body vibrated with barely controlled rage. What do you want, Kale? His pale eyes gleamed. I want the throne. I want the trueborn. And I want the royal bloodline erased. He gestured to the two corrupted guards. Surrender them, and I will let you die quickly. Thorn launched forward, but the guards moved to intercept. Saren realized with horror that this was about to turn into a slaughter, with her and the pups caught in the middle. She stepped forward, placing herself between Kale and the nest. The pups were fully awake now, whimpering in distress. If you want them, you go through me. Kale laughed, the sound empty and cruel. A powerless Omega playing hero? How adorable. Do you even know what you are? What you could be if properly trained and controlled. He took a step closer. I do not want to kill you, little Omega. I want to claim you. Use you. A trueborn is worth more than any kingdom. Saren felt something building inside her chest, hot and fierce. Her grandmother's pendant began to warm against her skin, then grew hotter, almost burning. She gripped it with one hand, and the metal blazed with sudden light. I am not powerless. Her voice was steady, certain. Not anymore. The pendant flared with brilliant golden light, so bright it cast harsh shadows across the room. Energy surged through her body, wild and untamed. Not the gentle healing she had used before, but something fierce and protective. The pups began to howl, tiny voices raised in distress and defiance. Thorn roared, a sound that was more animal than human, and launched himself at Kale. The corrupted guards moved to intercept. And Saren, acting on instinct older than thought, opened herself to the power building inside her chest and released it in a shockwave that exploded outward, filling the room with Omega power that crashed over everyone like a physical wave. Then everything went white. The psychic shockwave exploded outward from Saren like a physical force, golden light radiating from her grandmother's pendant in waves that distorted the air itself. The two corrupted guards who had been advancing on Thorn collapsed instantly, clutching their heads as though their skulls were splitting open. They arrived on the floor, overwhelmed by emotions that were not their own. Shame. Betrayal. The crushing weight of treachery against their king, their pack, everything they had sworn to protect. The projection was not gentle. It was brutal and unforgiving, forcing them to feel the full magnitude of their crimes. Kale staggered backward, his confident facade cracking for the first time. His pale eyes went wide with shock as the Omega power washed over him, forcing him to confront the weight of what he had done. Killing his own blood. Orchestrating the theft of innocent pups. Betraying his kingdom for ambition. All of it crashed down on him at once, and for a moment, his composure shattered completely. But Thorn felt something entirely different. The Omega energy that drove the others to their knees filled him with strength and clarity. His alpha power surged, amplified by Saren's projection, two halves of a whole finally working in concert. His eyes blazed brighter, his partially shifted form completing the transformation. Bones cracked and reformed, muscle and sinew reshaping themselves. Within seconds, he was no longer human, but a massive silver-black wolf, larger than any natural animal, standing taller than a man at the shoulder. The room itself seemed to react to the energy. Furniture rattled against the walls. Windows cracked, spider web fractures spreading across the glass. The very stones of the palace groaned under the pressure. Saren dropped to her knees, blood trickling from her nose. The pendant blazed against her chest, hot enough to burn, but she did not release it. Unlike the first time she had used her power, she remained conscious, learning instinctively to control the output. She could feel the energy flowing through her, could sense where it was directed, could shape it with will alone. Thorn did not waste the advantage she had given him. He launched himself at Kale with primal fury, jaws wide, claws extended. Kale barely had time to shift, his own transformation incomplete and desperate. The two collided in a tangle of teeth and claws and savage violence. They crashed through furniture, splintered wood flying, blood spattering the walls. Saren crawled toward the nest where the pups were howling in distress. She positioned her body between them and the chaos, sheltering them with her own flesh. Her vision blurred from the effort of maintaining the projection, but she could not stop. Not while the corrupted guards were still moving, still dangerous. One of the guards managed to push himself to his hands and knees, fighting through the overwhelming emotions. His face was twisted with pain and confusion, but he was recovering. The other guard followed suit, both advancing on Saren and the pups with mechanical determination despite the weight crushing down on their minds. Saren gathered what remained of her strength and projected again. This time, she shaped the emotion differently. Not shame, but fear. Pure, primal terror. She showed them visions that rose from their own minds, their own deepest dreads. Execution for treason. Exile into frozen wilderness. The shame of their families. The weight of pack rejection. She took their fears and amplified them 100-fold, making them real and immediate and inescapable. Both guards froze. Their advance stopped as though they had run into an invisible wall. One of them began to shake violently. The other dropped his weapon, the blade clattering against the stone floor. "Forgive me, my king." The guard's voice broke with genuine anguish. "He said you were weak. He said the kingdom needed new leadership. He said the old ways were dying. I believed him. I am sorry." The other guard collapsed completely, curling into himself, sobbing. The sound was broken and pathetic, a warrior reduced to a child by the weight of his own betrayal. Across the room, Kale realized he was losing. His corrupted guards had broken. His carefully laid plans were unraveling. The Trueborn he had meant to capture was proving far more dangerous than he had anticipated. And his cousin, the king he had thought weak with grief, was tearing him apart piece by piece. In desperation, Kale made a choice. He could not defeat Thorn in direct combat, but he could strike at what Thorn loved most. With the last of his strength, he broke away from the Alpha King and lunged not for Thorn, but for the nest where the pups lay vulnerable behind Saren's trembling form. Saren saw him coming. There was no time to project again, no time to use her power. Only time to act. She threw herself completely over the pups, covering their small bodies with her own. Kale's claws, tipped with silver for this exact purpose, raked across her back. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and searing. Deep gashes opened from her shoulder blades to her waist, blood soaking through the blue tunic instantly. But the pups were unharmed. Thorn's roar shook the entire wing of the palace. It was not a human sound or even a wolf sound, but something older and more terrible. Pure alpha fury unleashed. He crossed the distance between them in a single bound, jaws closing around Kale's throat before the traitor could strike again. There was a sickening crunch of breaking bone. Kale's eyes went wide with shock, then empty. When Thorn released him, the body crumpled to the floor, lifeless. The great wolf stood over his fallen cousin for a moment, chest heaving, blood dripping from his muzzle. Then the wolf form melted away, bones and muscle reshaping back into human form. Thorn, naked and covered in blood, rushed to where Saren had collapsed over the pups. He rolled her gently onto her side, revealing the extent of her wounds. The gashes were deep, bleeding heavily, and where Kale's silver-tipped claws had cut, the flesh was already turning an unhealthy gray. Silver poisoning. If not treated quickly, it would spread. The pups crawled out from beneath Saren's unconscious form, unhurt but distressed. They clambered over her, whimpering, tiny noses pressing against her face as though trying to wake her. Thorn's voice when he called for help was hoarse, raw with emotion. Mira. Now. The door burst open moments later. Mira arrived with her leather satchel, other pack members flooding in behind her to secure the room. Captain Bex moved immediately to check Kale's body, confirming what everyone already knew. The traitor was dead. Mira dropped to her knees beside Saren, her hands already moving with practiced efficiency. She tore away the ruined tunic, exposing the wounds fully. Her expression tightened when she saw the silver poisoning spreading from the cuts. Someone get me hot water, clean cloth, and bring my stores from the healing wing. Now. Pack members scattered to obey. Thorn remained kneeling beside Saren, one hand gripping hers, his eyes fixed on her face. She was unconscious, but breathing, her chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. Will she live? His voice was barely audible. Mira did not answer immediately. She was too busy working, pulling vials from her satchel, mixing compounds, applying paste to the wounds to neutralize the silver. The pups refused to move away, curling against Saren's side as though their small presence could anchor her to life. She will survive. Mira finally said, though her tone was grim. But she has given too much, too fast. Her body needs time to recover from the energy drain. The silver poisoning I can treat, but the exhaustion runs deeper than flesh. She needs days of rest. Maybe longer. Outside, the sounds of battle were fading. Victorious howls rose from the pack warriors. The hunters had been driven back or captured. Captain Vex appeared in the doorway again, his armor dented and bloodied, but his expression victorious. My king, the compound is secure. The traitors have been dealt with. Kale's remaining supporters have surrendered or fled. Thorn did not look away from Saren's face. And the hunters? Fleeing north. Without Kale's leadership and promises of payment, they scattered like the cowards they are. We captured 3 alive for questioning. The rest will not make it through the winter if they try to cross the mountains in this storm. Thorn nodded once. Interrogate the prisoners. I want to know how deep Kale's conspiracy ran. Who else knew? Who else helped him? Vex saluted and withdrew, leaving Thorn alone with Mira and the unconscious Omega who had saved his sons. The hours that followed blurred together. Mira worked through the night, treating Saren's wounds, monitoring the silver poisoning, forcing healing drafts between her lips. Thorn refused to leave, refused to eat or sleep, sitting vigil beside the bed where they had moved her. The pups refused to leave as well, curling against Saren's side, their small bodies rising and falling with her breathing. By dawn, the immediate danger had passed. The silver poisoning was contained. The wounds would scar but would heal. Saren's breathing had deepened into true sleep rather than unconsciousness. But she did not wake. One day passed. Then another. Mira assured Thorn this was normal, that Saren's body needed time to replenish what she had given. But still, he waited. On the morning of the 3rd day, Saren's eyes finally opened. She woke to find Thorn in the chair beside her bed, his hand holding hers. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes, his jaw shadowed with unshaven stubble. But when he saw her awake, relief flooded his features so completely that he looked years younger. The pups. Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. Safe. Because of you. Thorn's voice was thick with emotion. He helped her sit up carefully, mindful of her bandaged back. Brought her water, holding the cup to her lips with gentle hands. Kale? Dead. You are safe now. He set the cup aside. But the council has arrived. They heard what happened. What you did. Saren felt a spike of fear. What do they want? They want to verify you are truly trueborn. Thorn's expression was serious. And they want to know if you will stay. The The weight of those words settled over her. This was the moment. The choice that would define everything that came after. By evening, she was strong enough to walk. Thorn offered his arm, and together they made their way to the council chamber. The pups followed, no longer content to be separated from her. They walked at her heels like tiny shadows, their presence a reminder of what she had fought to protect. The council chamber was a large room with a high ceiling, lit by dozens of candles. 5 people sat at a long table, representatives from neighboring territories. They were older, stern-faced, carrying the weight of years and responsibility. They watched Saren enter with expressions ranging from curious to hostile. The questioning began immediately. How had she manifested trueborn abilities without training? Would she swear loyalty to the Iron Gate Kingdom? Would she accept the role of Royal Omega? One counselor, a woman with white hair and cold eyes, leaned forward. She is human. A trueborn has never been human. This is unnatural. A corruption of the old ways. But another, a man with kind eyes and graying temples, countered. She saved the royal heirs. She exposed and helped defeat a traitor. She nearly died protecting them. If the moon did not send her, then how do you explain it? The debate raged back and forth. Arguments about tradition and necessity, fear and hope, what had always been and what could be. Saren stood silent through it all, Thorn at her side, the pups at her feet. She thought of her cabin in the wilderness, the lonely years of exile, the life she had known. Small and quiet and safe. But she also thought of the pups looking up at her with complete trust. Of Thorn's hand steady on her arm. Of the pack members who had nodded to her with respect as she passed. Of belonging, finally, after so long alone. Thorn's voice cut through the debate like a blade. Enough. He stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate silence. She has proven herself in blood and sacrifice. The question is not whether she is worthy. The question is whether we are worthy of her. He turned to Saren, his amber eyes holding hers. The choice is yours. Always. Stay as Omega and Royal Consort, or leave with our protection and gratitude. No one will force you. That is our most sacred law. Saren took a breath, then slowly knelt. Not in submission, but in acceptance. In recognition of something larger than herself. I was cast out for being powerless. Her voice carried through the silent chamber. I lived 3 years believing I was broken. But you showed me the truth. I was never broken. She looked up at Thorn. I was waiting to find my pack. She looked down at the pups, who pressed against her knees. Waiting to find my purpose. Waiting for them. She rose to her feet, meeting the eyes of each council member in turn. I choose to stay. I choose the Iron Gate pack. I choose to be your Omega. The council exchanged looks. Then, one by one, they nodded. The bonding ceremony was brief, but profound. They gave her a silver circlet, delicate and beautiful, marked with a crescent moon. Thorn spoke the formal vow, his voice steady. As Alpha King, I accept Saren Vale as Royal Omega, heart of this pack, mother to the heirs, partner to the throne. When he took her hand, the psychic connection that had ignited when they first touched settled into place. Permanent. Unbreakable. They both felt it, a sense of rightness like puzzle pieces finally clicking together. The bond hummed between them, no longer wild but strong and steady. The pups sensed the completed bond and lifted their tiny heads, howling in unison. The sound was absurd and adorable, baby voices raised in what they thought was fierce declaration. Around the chamber, smiles broke through stern expressions. Saren looked down at them with overwhelming love. Ash, she named the smaller one. For strength in fire. Ember, she named his brother. For light in darkness. The gathered pack members, who had been watching from the edges of the room, bowed in acknowledgement. Their Omega. No longer questioned, but accepted. That evening, Saren stood at the window of the royal chambers, watching snow fall over the kingdom she had somehow become part of. The wounds on her back ached, but it was a good pain, the kind that meant healing. Thorn joined her, wrapping a fur cloak around her shoulders against the cold. His arm remained around her, solid and warm. Do you regret it? He asked quietly. Staying? No. Saren leaned into his warmth. For the first time in my life, I do not feel lost. Neither do I. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. Behind them, Ash and Ember slept peacefully in their nest, safe and content. Outside, the kingdom settled into peace. Guards walked the walls. The pack moved about their evening routines. Snow fell gently, covering the blood and violence of the past days with a blanket of white. I walked through your gates dusted with snow, Saren said softly, carrying your sons, rejected and alone. Now I stand here as Omega, no longer rejected, no longer alone. Thorn turned her to face him, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight. You were never alone. The moon was guiding you home. They stood together, Alpha and Omega, watching over their kingdom and their children, as the first dawn after the battle broke over Iron Gate. The sky lightened from black to deep blue to rose gold, painting the snow-covered world in colors of hope. And in the pack house below, as the kingdom woke to peace, a new story began to spread. The tale of the Omega who was not, and the Alpha who found his heart in the snow.